make sure that this is not funded. And then also, Steve King had indicated that there are witnesses that have come forward as whistleblowers who want to testify. I won't belabor all of them, but let me just give one example of one witness. One witness that would like to testify is a black farmer who is an original litigant against the United States Department of Agriculture. He farms on 200 acres in the South. He believes that injustice was done to black farmers and restitution was necessary. But the Pigford process is ripe with corruption and fraud. He is personally aware of homeless people who've received Pigford payments and attorneys who have trolled through neighborhoods signing up claimants that were known to have never farmed a day in their life. He personally knows of federal government employees who recruited illegitimate Pigford claimants and took a kickback for securing them money. He estimates that 60 to 70% of the claims filed under Pigford are fraudulent, as stated by Representative Steve King. And we have one more witness as well. Witness number 2 also has worked for the USDA for more than 30 years, largely in farm loans and finance in the central south of the United States. He personally knows of widespread fraud that he witnessed and bogus claims made on Pigford forms. We will go ahead and make this list available of sketches of potential whistleblowers who would like to come forward. And this again is more reason why we are demanding that Attorney General Holder hold a thorough and complete investigation before any more funds are distributed, and also go back and investigate the 1.6 potential billion dollars that has already gone out for Pigford and Pigford 1.
I think there's a lot that I could say or Bob could say as well, but I think it's time to take some questions. Yes.
How much do you think the investigation process will cost? And also, if the gavel changes hands, is this something you would go back and investigate?
There are some numbers across the board, but if I were to speculate on that, I'm sure I'd be wrong. I would instead say that I believe that getting it right, the matter of principle, and not rewarding people that are seeking to defraud the federal government, stands up against the cost of an investigation. And the idea, this is the real story here is that yes, people were discriminated against. That was dealt with in a consent decree. And the Congress did not act on Pigford 2 that was brought in the House and also brought in the Senate. But we have a Secretary of Agriculture who's taken license with the language in the Farm Bill, and now he and Eric Holder have negotiated a second consent decree that is not yet approved by the courts. So right now, they have created the facade that they are moving forward with legal authority and moving forward with the idea that the courts will approve this. And this Congress has not approved Pigford 2, and the courts have not approved a second consent decree. And to move forward in the face of all of this, all these allegations of fraud is irresponsible, and we must get to the bottom of it. It's our job to do oversight regardless of the cost. Yes, sir.
And the cost would be far, far less than the amount of money that is being proposed to be spent here of $1.3 billion. It would be in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
And if the gavel changes hands, would you go back?
And Michelle, just remember, in 2010 is when they negotiated that agreement. So the directions that they contend came from the 2008 Farm Bill weren't acted upon by anybody until such time as we had a new administration, and then a year into the new administration plus a month. Yes, sir.
Why do you think you're not getting more support on your side of the aisle for this? I mean, this latest $1.2 billion has been floating around for months. It's passed the House. It's on the Senate side. I don't know of any Republican who speaks. They might talk about overall spending, but not against this particular program. Why are you not getting more support?
Well, it's a racially charged issue. I mean, that is the bottom line, and people are afraid to touch it. If this were something else, then I think you'd see a real focus on it. But especially if you take conservatives from the Deep South, it's radioactive to them for an issue, and so that's one of the reasons. And another is it just hasn't risen to the attention level of this Congress, partly because we haven't said enough, done enough, even though Mr. Goodlatte held that hearing and started to illuminate the issue. It is, and I don't think anybody realized where they were taking the authority from in order to go out and negotiate a Pigford 2 it's moving towards a consent decree if it's approved by the court. This is a Obama administration getting together and deciding what they can do. By the way, Judge Friedman's opinion on Pigford 1 starts out with these words: 40 acres and a mule. And he goes on to lament that he can't right all the wrongs of slavery and segregation. And I lament that we can't either, but he attempts to, and I don't believe we can. I think we've got to close the book and move on.
One thing I would like to add is that this issue isn't just limited to the issue of black farmers. Now it appears that it's being expanded also to Native Americans, and then to women, and then to Hispanic, and there is one pool after another now that this is being expanded with. Again, if there are legitimate issues of discrimination, we believe they must be dealt with, and the federal government must pay. But again, we really believe that the greatest aggrieved parties are the black farmers who were discriminated against. They must be made whole, and for a number of them, it has not been timely. That's wrong. That's an error. That must be dealt with, but at the same time, this shouldn't be used as a predicate for fraud by greedy trial lawyers, greedy political activists, and people that are just out to make a quick buck. The true aggrieved black farmers must be made whole, they must be compensated, and it must be done as quickly as possible. But again, with this thorough going work that both Ranking Member Goodlatte has tried to uncover, and also Representative King.
I'm just curious, why do you think that no one was fired for engaging in discrimination? You'd mentioned that earlier. Why was no one fired?
They should have been. We under the consent decree, the USDA did not admit wrong. There was no wrong that was admitted. And we believe that the USDA should be investigated. Any employee that's identified or can be identified, something, it seems to me, should be done on their personnel record. Either they should be fired, they should be reprimanded, something should happen to those employees, because it is not okay to discriminate against any American of any race or either gender. It is not permissible, and we shouldn't stand for it.
Is it not true that some of them actually got promoted after practicing discrimination?
That's all the more reason why we need to have, this issue begs an investigation from Attorney General Holder and from the United States Congress.
Let me add that in my conversation with Secretary Vilsack yesterday, when I wanted to let him know my intentions on following through with investigations if we weren't going to get cooperation from the administration. And I asked him that very question: why was nobody fired, and why was nobody that worked for the USDA? If there's $2.3 billion worth of discrimination that took place, then why has there been not one penny worth of disciplinary action brought against any of these employees? And his response was that he's not willing to relitigate Pigford 1, that there are new people in place to evaluate Pigford 2, and that we can't go back to the 1980s, and well, this would include also the 1990s, and bring punishment against people that may have committed discrimination. I think it's curious that we can go back and pay people for alleged discrimination in the same period of time that we can't identify the discriminators. And I think you've pointed out that discrepancy.
Can I ask a follow-up question to something that was asked earlier, and that is about the potential changing of the gavel here in January? Is this one of those issues that you'd like to see investigated in a Republican-led House? And are there other issues? You'll have the subpoena power. You'll have the power to call hearings, at will. Where do you see it going in January?
Well, I am no longer the ranking member. This issue has been going on for a long time. But if this kind of massive expenditure is undertaken without accountability on the part of the Department of Agriculture, I think it's the duty of the Congress to exercise that kind of oversight. I think that should be done right now, especially if there are plans to undertake such a massive expenditure without the kind of hearings that I think are necessary to look into that, and without the kind of proper investigation by the Government Reform Committee, Agriculture Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and within the Department of Agriculture by the Inspector General's office and so on. So I would be calling for those hearings right now, but certainly we're not in a position to effectuate that in the minority. So in the majority, we certainly would give a high priority to looking to make sure that the taxpayers' money is being spent wisely, and that justice is being done in the administration of a settlement like this.
I'll just quickly add 3 things I've got in mind. Would be investigation into Pigford, one into Acorn, and one into the racial discrimination allegations in the Department of Justice. Those three come to mind as, I think, a duty of any Republican majority, and we're not gonna get cooperation from this administration or this majority. We've tried that.
Do you have any support in the Senate on this? You're calling on the Senate not to move forward on an agreement on Pigford 2. Is there anybody who's receptive to that in the Senate? Do you have support?
I would perhaps give you a start to direct your questions perhaps at Senator Coburn, who I think has been fairly vocal on this, and I think he can articulate that pretty well without my help, though.
Ms. Bachmann, how big do you believe the class of fraudulent claims is versus the total? I think 94,000 was the total number that you mentioned of claimants under Pigford. How many of those do you believe are fraudulent or otherwise non-deserving?
We have no independent information to verify how many claimants there were. What we know are the statistics that are given to us by the government. What the Census Bureau says, a total pool of 33,000 black farmers, and yet there are 94,000 litigants. We think that's why Attorney General Holder should look into this issue, and that's why Congress should hold an investigation, because we are without knowledge to answer that question.
So what would be different in the payment process under this settlement right now than what was laid out in the GAO report in 2006, and how the court was managing those cases and going through and verifying and checking and kicking people out and putting people in? What would be different?
I can speak to that with regard to Track A, which is essentially the claim that's a $40,000, excuse me, a $50,000 claim. There aren't distinctions. It's exactly the same. You have to allege that you are black, wanted to be a black farmer, that you were denied an application and that you believe you were discriminated against, and then the follow-up is to have an affidavit, which is part of the form. It's like 2 inches by 4 inches, a little square box in the middle, for a place to sign for your witness who confirms that you have complained either in writing or orally to a USDA official or a member of Congress. So if you can find a buddy that can sign the affidavit and you check the boxes, that's pretty much, if the rest of the information holds up, that's the standard for both Pigford 1 and Pigford 2. But under Track A. Track B, the litigation component of this, the more difficult one, the one that paid off Shirley Sherrod, by the way, there's a cap on that of $250,000. There wasn't a cap on Pigford 1. And by the way, we should think about what this means. I mean, I heard Shirley Sherrod's speech. I didn't know she was a representative of the USDA when I heard it. It sounded to me like what you would hear before an NAACP convention. Then I heard her broader speech, and I thought the theme of it was fine, but it brought the focus on this. And remember that she represented New Communities Incorporated, a black communal farm in Georgia. And they put together more than 6,000 acres, I believe it was. That corporation went under in '85. The corporation was dissolved in '89. It was reformed again after the Pigford consent decree was signed. That was April 14th of '99. And she and her husband reformed New Communities Incorporated May 1st of the year 2000, presumably to take advantage of being able to file a claim on Pigford. And thereby the largest civil rights settlement in the history of America, Pigford won. Shirley Sherrod and her husband are the lead recipients from that, at $13 million. And that was, she received notice of that on July 22nd of 2009. And on July 25th, she was hired by the Secretary of Agriculture. That to me is curious, and I'd like to know what's up. And I'm putting down the
Isn't that the
questions.
point of some of this? That perhaps she reformed, but I mean, her farm couldn't get loans. I mean, that she went to court and presumably demonstrated that she faced hardships from the department that white farmers didn't. I mean, the fact that her farm would have gone under is the logical conclusion to that, right? I mean, that's what they're arguing, is that they couldn't survive.
I lived through the farm crisis, and a lot of my neighbors went under, and '85 was the pivotal year. We don't know the facts underneath this. That's sealed with the records of the court. That's something we should take a look at. I don't pass judgment on whether it was a legitimate claim or not, but I think it's curious that she was hired by the USDA 3 days after she got the notice of the largest settlement in the largest civil rights case in the history of America. The man in the middle.
What will you tell the black farmers who really were discriminated against and who you say you want to make whole, whose lives are going to fall apart because you're prolonging this process even more after they've waited years and years and years? each farmer is not just gonna be handed money, therefore each person will be judged on, based on the merits of their case, so couldn't you investigate and also allow them to participate in this settlement process that has been approved in the courts and by the House and other entities?
You know, if this goes forward, there isn't any way to undo. And I think that the injustice that we're seeing now is an injustice to black farmers that have been discriminated against. But it's something that's not perpetrated by these members of Congress that oppose an appropriation now. It's something that's perpetrated by the attorneys that I believe helped and set up the organization to promote and facilitate the fraud that I believe exists, and those who cooperated with it that were unjustly filing claims. That's what brought this about. We're doing our job. I'm sorry it is this way. It'd be a lot easier to go forward and do something that's more constructive. But one more question, somebody else answer that, and I think we need to go.
The CR
What's that?
bill,
Pigford 2 was not
No.
litigated in the courts, it was a consent decree
Right.
fashioned by the Attorney General.
And it's not a decree yet. I
Right,
just,
right, that's correct.
Michelle is saying, and just remind us that Pigford 2 was not a consent decree that was approved by the courts. It was negotiated by Eric Holder and Tom Vilsack in cooperation with John Boyd, who's the president of the Black Farmers Association, who testified before the Judiciary Committee here a couple of years ago. And it has not been yet approved by the courts. So right now, we're being asked to appropriate $1.15 billion to a consent decree that at least technically doesn't exist for an agreement that's been negotiated by the Attorney General and the Secretary of Agriculture without the authority of Congress. And so I just ask you, look at that language, and let's take one more question, you back there, and then we'll finish it. Somebody else can answer it, I'm talking too much.
about the CR bill that's supposed to be voted on later today, have any of you been able to read it to see what's in it?
That's one of our concerns. We don't know what's in all of these bills yet. And that's another reason why we're here today with this press conference. We are here to put Speaker Pelosi, Leader Reid, and also President Obama on notice that we believe that it's important that some of these questions be answered, that investigations be completed before there is funding for the Pigford 2 settlement, because of the great yawning gaps in information that we have. Again, if we have a settlement containing potentially billions of dollars and yet not one USDA employee has lost their job or been reprimanded, something is seriously wrong with either the consent decrees, the negotiated settlement that Eric Holder was just involved in February of 2010. Something's very seriously wrong, because there should not be allowed discrimination against any American, and yet a government employee is allowed to retain his job. On the same hand, we're very concerned going forward that yet even more classes of individuals will come before this Congress and ask for future Pigford-like settlements with very little evidence, very little investigation, and we are again putting Congress on notice, and we're putting the President on notice, and we're putting the Attorney General on notice that we believe, in light of all the yawning gaps in data, that there must be an investigation before one more dime of taxpayer money is left.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.